Imagine stepping out of a luxury car on a freezing night, the street empty, everything silent, until you spot a small, trembling shadow next to the dumpster, pulling an empty shopping cart. It's a boy, thin, dirty, wrapped in a torn blanket, trying his best to survive the cold. He's only 8 and all alone, or at least, so it seems. The sight is already heartbreaking, but then, all of a sudden, you notice a tiny arm moving inside the cart. It's his little sister, barely 3 years old, curled up there, sleeping against the icy wind. The boy starts awake, shielding his sister as best he can. He doesn't ask for money. He only asks for one thing. "Sir, can you find my sister some food? Please, before anything else, I'm here for her." What will this millionaire man do when faced with such a request? Will he just walk away, or change everything? Stay with me, because what happens next will take you by complete surprise. The rain fell in thin, icy threads, clinging to the windshield of Leonardo's car and smearing the streetlights outside. He turned off the engine and let out a tired sigh, one of those that seemed to weigh down the chest. The clock said it was nearly midnight, and all he wanted was to get home, crash on the couch, and forget about the world. But before stepping out of the car, a strange feeling pulled at him, dragging his attention outside, to the right side of the parking lot. The grocery store was already closed, the grates pulled down over the doors. The wind howled between the buildings, carrying with it the scent of rain, wet trash, and cold asphalt. Puddles shone on the sidewalk under the faint glow of the street lamps. At that hour, almost nobody passed by. But there was a small figure, crouched beside the big dumpster, almost deliberately hidden in the shadows. For a second, Leonardo thought it was just a discarded bag of trash, but something moved. He squinted, trying to see more clearly. His first instinct was to look away. He quickly glanced aside, shivering not from the cold, but from that discomfort you feel when you see something you wish you hadn't noticed. The car window started to mist over. Rubbing his hands together, he tried to push the thought away, but it kept coming back. That shadow was still there, curled up, unmoving. Leonardo had never been one to get involved. Life had taught him to mind his own business, to stay on course, not to get distracted. People begging on the street, he always figured it was better to help from a distance, through donations or bank transfers, better not to get too close to that world. But tonight, exhausted as he was, it felt like something inside him had softened. He opened the door slowly, feeling the freezing wind strike his face. He pulled up the collar of his coat and walked a few steps, soaking his shoes in the water at the curb. Out here, with the noise of the rain louder, fat droplets thudded against the trash bags. Suddenly, in the midst of the vast silence of the empty lot, he heard a sound, low, almost imperceptible, like a stifled sob. He sharpened his senses. No, not a cat, not an animal. Someone was crying, doing their best to muffle it so nobody would hear. Little by little, in the scant light, Leonardo saw a skinny boy, hair plastered to his forehead, face half hidden behind a blanket so old its original color was impossible to tell. The boy was sitting cross-legged, hunched as if he wanted to disappear. Next to him, almost toppled over, was an empty shopping cart, weighed down with just a few filthy plastic bags. You could see the boy shivering. The way he clutched the blanket, pressing his face into it, told of someone trying not to feel the cold anymore, even knowing how pointless it was. His cheeks flushed, nose running, and despite the tears, the boy glanced anxiously around, on guard for anyone who might approach. Leonardo stopped, at a loss. His heart thudded, nausea curling in his stomach as if he'd eaten something rotten. Part of him wanted to head straight back, jump in the car, race away, but his feet seemed glued to the rain-soaked ground. His mind spun with questions. What do I do now? Should I call someone? What if it turns into a scene? What if nobody appreciates my help? It was a mix of guilt, discomfort, and something new, a concern he struggled to shake off. The boy heard Leonardo's footsteps draw near and shrank further into the blanket, as if he could disappear completely. Wide eyes, shining with fear and a kind of strength, locked directly onto Leonardo. He didn't beg, didn't smile, just watched, bracing himself in case someone tried to get too close. That's when Leonardo noticed something. At the side of the shopping cart, pressed in tight, was something extra, a small shape, almost invisible. He took a step closer, trying to make it out. The boy stayed silent, but his eyes quivered, tracking every movement. In that instant, it felt as though time stopped. Leonardo saw, poking from beneath the blanket, a tiny arm as smaller than an adult's hand, dangling from the cart, as if someone slept inside. It was a little girl, no more than 3 years old, curled up, fast asleep despite the biting cold. The shock squeezed his chest even tighter. Holding his breath, throat burning, he looked at the little girl. She was sleeping deeply, eyelashes trembling, lips parted in a faint line of breath. The boy looked at his sister, then at Leonardo, protective instincts flaring in his eyes. The two of them, alone on that curb, were invisible to the rest of the city. Leonardo didn't know what to say. He just stood there, rain trickling down his shoulders, and for once it felt like he was the one outside, exposed, vulnerable. The boy's face, forced to grow up before its time, was more worn down than alive. Still, he held the blanket around his sister carefully, tucking it so she wouldn't wake up cold. Minutes passed, silent. The street seemed quieter than ever. Out in the distance, cars zipped by at speed, bound for destinations unknown, as if nobody knew or cared about what happened there. Deep down, Leonardo saw himself in that scene. He remembered days when he'd gone hungry, the fears he'd carried as a child, how he'd wanted to disappear so he wouldn't have to feel the pain anymore. And even before taking a step, he knew this night would not end like any other. He stood there in the rain, wondering why him. Why was he the one seeing this, now? Maybe it was fate, or maybe just a chance at a new beginning, whether for one of them or all three. The ground seemed to breathe coldness. You know those bone-deep dawns where no one else passes by, the streetlights pouring a pale, tired glow onto the sidewalk? That was the kind of night. Leonardo parked and opened the door slowly because he couldn't stop staring. He wasn't sure what he'd seen. There was something by the dumpster, just a small lump under a ragged bit of blanket, so thin and torn it looked more like a forgotten napkin. The wind rattled loose plastic, cracking the silence, just that, and the sound of cars spraying water on a distant street. Leonardo pulled up his expensive collar, but out here, even dressed to the nines, the cold cut deep. Imagine sleeping here. The thought crept in before he knew it, and for a moment, he felt ridiculous just standing, staring. Then he realized that lump was moving. Hard to believe, but there was a bare foot poking out, toes white with cold. The boy was shaking, not just from the wind, but with a kind of fear, ready to bolt at the first sign of any adult. Just then, the boy's shopping cart made a weird, scraping sound as one wheel dragged across the cracked pavement. It was one of those small details that, if you paid attention, could break your heart clean in two. The cart was empty, just a few dirty bags, maybe a squashed cardboard box at the bottom. No food, no comfort, not even a toy. Just an abandoned cart, pushed up and down the city, trying to be a home for a boy with nothing. Leonardo said nothing. He stood there for some seconds, barely breathing, as though any move might scare the boy off. On the boy's face was that mix of suspicion and pure exhaustion, the look of someone who hadn't slept right in days. Hollow eyes, nose red from the wind, cheeks grimy, and still trying to cover his whole body with a blanket that honestly had nothing left to it. If he looked any closer, he might not be able to bear it. The boy seemed lighter than he should be, hunched over, as though the cold had stolen a piece of every good thing he ever had. And still, there was something there. It wasn't empty. It was protection. His little hand gripped the cold metal of the cart, and beneath the cloth, now and then, there was a slight stir. He wasn't just looking out for himself. He was taking care of someone or something there, even if the world didn't give a damn. Leonardo's first shock was realizing how some people just disappear into the cityscape. Before, he never noticed, saw, but never really saw, as if they were just another shadow, another bit of trash. But now, suddenly there was a boy too little to steady his own body, trembling but trying to look brave. And beside him, the empty shopping cart was almost a shield. Every now and then, headlights would streak by, throwing long shadows of the two of them across the shuttered market wall. The boy didn't even blink anymore, as if cars didn't exist. Just him, tucked in that icy solitude. Leonardo just stared. He could have sworn he felt a tight knot, rising from his gut to his chest. He wondered why no one ever did anything. Why hadn't he? That torn blanket was burned into his mind, as though screaming, "This is all I have." Suddenly the boy pulled the blanket closer to the belly of the cart, glancing around, alert, as if afraid someone might come and take everything, even the little he still tried to protect. On top of the cold, there was a scent hard to describe, of wet clothes, rain, days without a shower, but strangely also of life. Life that insists. Even mistreated. Even aching. Leonardo stood still, almost grieving that instant. A wealthy businessman, he'd always worked to never feel even half the hunger or fear he saw now. He'd always figured scenes like this were other people's problem, government, charities, police, whoever. But suddenly, he couldn't see it that way anymore. He couldn't just turn away. But he also didn't know what to say, or how not to scare the boy. The boy, without lifting his eyes, began to tremble harder, and you could hear the faint clatter of teeth, muffled under the blanket but echoing all the way down the sidewalk. If someone walked by right now, they might notice nothing at all. Just another kid sleeping rough, just another lost cart. But it wasn't. It was a scene, for whatever reason, that glued itself to Leonardo's soul. Sure, he felt pity, but also a deep shame for having never realized how much a torn blanket could mean. The cold wasn't just outside. It was a lack of hope, blanketing the boy much more than that ragged fabric. Leonardo breathed in, slow and deep. He could have left, climbed in his heated car, and shut out the feeling. But he didn't. He stayed, hands deep inside his pockets, frozen between leaving and doing something. What would a decent person do, even not knowing what to say to a child with nothing but a thin blanket and an empty cart to shelter him? Leonardo holds on for a moment at the car door. Outside, it's raining harder again, that familiar drumming on the luxury car's roof. He barely notices the cozy seats now. All he wants is to get away, forget it happened as he always has. After all, he's seen so much sadness on the streets, it started to feel normal. But tonight the cold feels different, heavier somehow. When he finally decides, he exhales, shoves open the door, and the cold air stings his face. The parking lot's a desert, nothing but yellowed lamplight throwing long shadows and the patter of rain all around. He pulls his expensive coat tighter, but inside, suddenly, everything is squeezed and taut. Leonardo walks quickly, expensive shoes making slow clicks on the wet concrete. He tries not to look at the boy, but every time his eyes stray that way, he can't help it. The kid is curled by the dumpster, nearly vanishing beneath the threadbare blanket. The empty cart beside him seems larger, that odd will stuttering along the pavement. He almost keeps walking. But in the hush of the rain, a small sound reaches him, a muffled sob. The kind of cry a child swallows so as not to draw attention. But Leonardo hears, even as he wants to block his ears. He feels something strange, like a fist squeezing his chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to care. But the boy's sob echoes in his mind. He stops. All his busy grown-up routines and countless worries melt away in that instant. He stands there, a big man filling the space, but inside a tangle of fear and guilt. It's still raining. He thinks about heading back. Maybe slip the kid some cash, call someone, offer the same good luck he's watched others hand out. But something keeps his feet planted. He remembers all the family advice, never get involved. Friends warned him, you never know with street kids, Leo. But the sound of the sob grows, and he feels like a coward even for considering leaving. The boy has his back to Leonardo as he approaches. His shoulders tremble. Who knows if it's the cold or the crying he's trying to hide. The blanket doesn't cover everything. Bare, filthy feet, scarred from walking endless streets. Leonardo hesitates, staring at the ground, breathing deep the way you would before a big business meeting. But this isn't business. This is real life, someone suffering right next to him. He thinks, what do I do? And honestly, it's like every certainty vanishes. It's not about bravery, just a kind of compassion that truly hurts. He crouches slowly, trying not to startle him. He doesn't know what to say. There are no ready-made lines for this. The boy senses him, and stops crying quite so desperately. Now he just sniffs, drawing himself up as small as possible. Up close, Leonardo sees not the dirt so much as the eyes. Those eyes, far too tired for someone so small. There's fear, but also strength. The boy grips the empty cart, as if it might shield him from anything. The only sounds are water dripping from the dumpster roof, a far-off car racing by, and Leonardo's heart pounding so hard it feels audible. He thinks about the boy's mother, what could have happened. He thinks of his own kids, his warm home, and feels ashamed of complaining about traffic only an hour before. The boy says nothing, only looks. Another short sob escapes, and he wipes his nose on the back of his dirty hand, a practiced move, the kind of thing you learn when you hide your tears. Leonardo sees himself at that age, trying to pretend he felt nothing so as not to trouble anyone. His own childhood flashes back, the old mattress, the smell of mold, hunger chewing away at his stomach. For a moment, he's no longer a successful businessman, just a man who recognizes a child's pain because, in some way, he's lived it too. He wants to ask, are you okay? But is afraid of the answer. He knows, obviously, the answer is no. He stands there for a few seconds that seem to last forever, trying to build up the courage. The rain tapers off, but the cold only deepens. The sobs get less frequent, but don't disappear. Leonardo pats his pocket, finds his wallet. He thinks about taking out a big bill, fixing it all right then and there with money. But when he looks at the boy, he realizes that's not what he needs. Money isn't enough. What he misses is someone, protection, hope, even. The boy never takes his eyes off his sister, as though any movement from a stranger might be danger. And that's when, really looking, Leonardo understands. The deeper discomfort isn't about being close to misery. It's about sensing, in some way, that he helped let this happen, as an adult, a citizen, a person who could have done more. He still doesn't know what he's going to do. He's scared to get involved. He thinks about consequences, his job, family, what people will say. But on that stretch of wet sidewalk, because of a muffled sob in the dead of night, he just can't walk away. He waits there, silent, hoping the right move will come from somewhere inside. And quietly, he asks himself, do I even have the guts to turn my back now? Leonardo drew a deep breath. The smell of wet asphalt, rain, dirt, a hint of cigarette smoke by the dumpster filled his nose as he crossed the almost empty parking lot. The water dripping from the overhang beat out a rhythm. Tick-tock, tick-tock. It had rained so much that night, steam rose from the ground, mixing with the hesitant amber streetlight. His car, shiny and spotless, looked completely out of place in that end-of-the-world scene. At first, he didn't want to look. The crooked shopping cart abandoned by the trash was nearly invisible. But then that soft sound, suppressed sobs, traces of a cry trying to hide from the world, caught his ear. Accidentally, Leonardo saw, and then couldn't look away. There was a boy, bunched up, looking even smaller with that tattered blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His face. Leonardo would never forget it. Skin marked by days without a bath, huge dark eyes wide with fear and something more, a kind of stubborn bravery that didn't belong to an 8-year-old. The boy held his breath when he saw the man approaching. But before Leonardo could speak, he saw what no one expected. A tiny arm, so little it was barely visible in the gloom, ever so slowly reached out from deep inside the cart. Just an arm, fingers spread, as if searching for something. The boy spun around instantly, placing himself between Leonardo and the cart, bare feet planted in a cold puddle, his thin body a wall of flesh and bones to protect whoever was inside. Leonardo felt a leaden weight bloom inside him, a mixture of guilt and shame, and, at the same time, a desperate urge to kneel down and somehow erase the whole scene from the world. For a moment, the street fell completely silent. The boy didn't say a word, just stared at the stranger. His expression shifted from terror to something else, something obvious. He was more than afraid. He was protective. Stern, wary, holding a secret far bigger than himself. No one would get near his sister. He didn't care about the big man, the fancy car, the elegant coat. The boy was a wall. Leonardo opened his hand slowly, not quite sure what to do with it. He was speechless. The icy wind bit at his skin. The boy's hair stuck to his rain-soaked forehead. He trembled, not just from the cold, but from fear, pain, maybe even something Leonardo couldn't name. It was like the boy knew everything that could go wrong, what adults do when they think they can help. A far-off horn cracked the silence. Leonardo looked at the cart. Now he saw clearly, the little girl curled up like a sparrow, blanket pulled nearly to her nose. Her lashes were wet with dried tears. She slept deeply, worn out by exhaustion and cold. The boy looked at her, then at Leonardo again. Some kids are born with that look, as though they know the world can be dangerous before they ever learn to read. A gaze that asks for help but doesn't let anyone get too close. He adjusted the cloth around his sister but never took his eyes off the man standing in front of them. Leonardo felt his face burn. A memory flashed, himself, tiny, forgotten in some hospital corner, hitting him like a slap. For a second, he wanted to turn around, get back in the car, pretend nothing happened. But it was already too late for that. Every move Leonardo made, the boy sharpened his attention. His little hands, cracked and bruised, were ready to grab the cart and flee if he had to. He didn't blink. There was a courage there that seemed unfair for a child so small. The sky opened even more, fine rain turning misty, sticking to both of their cheeks. The kid's clothes offered no protection now. Still, he didn't shake as much as Leonardo expected. His fear was different. He'd taken on whatever role life demanded. Shield, grown-up, mother, and father to his sister. No one was getting past. In the tense silence, all you could hear was the ticking of Leonardo's wristwatch and the hiss of rain on the plastic cart. Leonardo wanted to say something, but his voice jammed in his throat. He just stood, a dull pain rising that wouldn't budge. The boy didn't ask for a thing. No food, no money, no blanket. Just stood there, off balance, right in front of his little sister. As if his very presence said, "If you want to get by, you'll have to get through me." His dignity was almost painful to look at. Not pride, promise. A promise for her. Davi, after what felt like eternity, let out a sigh. He murmured softly into the cart, arranging his sister's face so it wouldn't rest against the cold iron. Leonardo felt his heart squeeze even tighter. It wasn't just compassion, it was powerlessness, the sense that this moment was his responsibility too. The cold wouldn't quit. The boy shifted slightly, adjusting his thin body to keep an eye on whatever might come. His feet were purple with cold. Still, he didn't move. Not a tear. Just those hollow eyes, gleaming in the dark. Leonardo put his hands in his expensive coat, feeling its texture. Part of him wanted to hand over everything, money, food, his own jacket. But he knew that wouldn't do a thing if it broke the boy's shield. He wasn't protecting things. He was protecting pure, desperate love, the sort that survives only when there's nowhere else to turn. It dawned on Leonardo how long it had been since he'd really seen another person. Actually stopped, really saw, beyond what looks like neglect. There, under the sickly glow of the streetlight, among trash bags and abandoned carts, a boy was doing everything he could to save his sister, even if it was only with his own frail body, blocking out the world. And for the first time in ages, Leonardo knew he couldn't just leave. He couldn't pretend he hadn't seen anymore. The boy's breathing is soaked in fear, as if each breath carries its own bad memory. The curb is still dark and damp, only the honeyed light from the street lamp dripping weakness over them. Leonardo feels a drop of rain slide down his neck, but doesn't move. He watches the boy slowly wake, eyes lost. The first thing he does is wrap his arms around the cart, like a man clinging to invisible treasure. There's barely time for the boy to sit up before his eyes go wide again. His whole face is jumbled, exhaustion, anger, suspicion. Ready to fight, with no strength left to fight. Brow furrowed, not in temper but in the fatigue of someone who's tired of asking. The frayed edge of the blanket trails along the concrete, and the boy's head is always swiveling between his sister and the stranger standing there. Leonardo's mouth goes dry, struggling for words. He thinks about all the times he walked right past scenes like this, assuming it was someone else's problem, that maybe his eyes were exaggerating. Now he was here, stuck, shame burning in his chest, mixed with the silly fear of making things worse. He didn't know which hurt more, seeing those kids in that state, or realizing he'd never really looked at a child like that. "Please, don't take her away," the boy says, almost a whisper. His voice is shaky, holding weeks' worth of worry. He tries to sound strong, but he's trembling from cold, hunger, and something deeper. Just hearing those words, Leonardo feels everything crumble inside. The street is empty, just the odd car rushing by. No time to look around. The city seems disconnected from the scene, like no one else exists. The rain makes noise hitting the awning of the closed market, spattering near the boy's injured foot. Leonardo sees how the sneaker is torn at the edge, his big toe almost poking out. Inside the cart, his little sister remains oblivious, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, hair tangled and pale. The boy reaches over to check if she's awake, but she just takes a deep breath, peaceful, as if the cart were the only safe place she knows. Davi shifts, pulls the blanket higher over the girl, and faces Leonardo again, eyes burning. Leonardo crouches a bit, trying to make himself smaller, thinking maybe he'll seem less threatening that way. The wind brushes icy drops over them both, makes Leonardo's hands retreat deep into his expensive coat. Even with the best coat in the world, he feels a foreign chill, a kind of emptiness he's never known before. The boy's anger mixes with fear, knotted up in his voice. "She's my sister. I take care of her. Don't let them take her away, please." The way he grips the card is fiercer than any scream. Leonardo takes it like a punch to the gut. He sees that, even so small, this boy has already learned to hold on too tight. Learned that if he doesn't protect her, no one will do it for him. A horn blares in the distance. A stray dog barks, sounding lost too. Davi bites his lip, never taking his eyes off the man. He wants to believe, but he can't. Maybe no one has ever kept a promise to him. A shadow flickers through Leonardo's expression. He remembers, briefly, a long-ago time when he was afraid of grown-ups too. But he never went without like this. Not like this. The boy hesitates, then asks, just with his gaze, what if this man is just like all the others? What if he's just another one who promises and vanishes? Leonardo feels the weight of that silence. It's not just the cold here. It's the lack of trust, wrapping around everything. He forces himself to speak, trying to show on his face that he means no harm. "I'm not going to split you up," I just want to help. But he knows the words get lost. Davi clutches the edge of the cart. His face hardens, looks old, too tired for a child his size. She wakes up crying sometimes. I stay with her till she sleeps again. If somebody comes, I don't let anyone take her, he says, voice low, cracking. The two of them are locked together by their gaze, as if, only now, they realize just how alone they really are. Leonardo breathes in deeply. The smell of rain blends with the sourness of garbage nearby. It cuts deep. He never imagined anyone could call this home. Davi wants to scream, but stays silent. He's learned to stay quiet so as not to attract the wrong kind of attention. He's angry at those who ask but never listen. He is hope and fear tangled together in the same place. Thunder rolls in the distance, the little sister shifts, sighs softly. Leonardo realizes, in a way that's more feeling than thought, that some people fight so hard just to keep the little they've got, they forget to ask for anything for themselves. He feels he can't just go, even though he's never known what to do in a situation like this. The boy hugs the cart with both arms as if it's everything. And maybe it is. The air stays heavy. Courage here is being born every day in Davi's small body. At the same time, trust withers away. It's terrifying to trust when the world's only ever taught you not to trust anyone. The silence thickens. Leonardo drops his eyes, nods slowly. Neither of them moves. The millionaire senses a kind of courage here he never learned in any school or boardroom. A child's courage, made of strength and fear woven together, the need for just a small place in the world where his little sister can sleep. The boy wonders if he's still dreaming. But he can't take the risk, can't let his guard down. Not anymore. The only thing he says again, now softer, looking at Luisa. Just don't let them take her, please. The night grows colder. Leonardo stays put, feeling something inside him begin to crack. Leonardo stood there, skin prickling and not from the cold. He looked at Davi, that thin boy with big, wild, frightened eyes, standing in front of the battered shopping cart like someone guarding their real home. The harsh sound of Davi's breathing mixed with the faint hiss of the cart's wet wheels against the sidewalk. For a few seconds, the world was just the three of them, the rich man, the boy, and the tiny girl sleeping on her side, face hidden in a torn blanket. Leonardo put his hand in his expensive coat pocket. He pulled out some crumpled bills. Already acting on autopilot, money had always solved everything for him, for all the lives that orbited his parties, his business, his employees. He even thought, maybe if I give him 50, 100, he'll buy food, problem solved. But Davi just watched. Didn't move, didn't reach out his hand. It's okay. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to help, Leonardo said softly, not sure if he was talking to the boy or to his own conscience. Davi wiped his dirty nose on the ragged sleeve of his hoodie. He just stared at Leonardo. The kind of stare that cuts through the thickest, warmest coat. You can keep your money, mister, he whispered, lowering his head and gently fixing the blanket over his sister. The space between them grew heavy again. The sound of faraway cars, rain hitting the battered metal of the cart. Davi stood there, even smaller now, hair plastered to his sweaty forehead, hand carefully moving to shield Luisa's face. Leonardo felt awkward. He was about to try again, but swallowed hard. Part of him wanted to speak, make a nervous joke, ask if someone would come for them soon. But he couldn't take his eyes off the cart. The smell of rain, trash, plastic, and lost childhood. Davi started, but his voice broke, barely a whisper. She needs food, then somewhere warm to sleep. Just for her. The way he said it left no room for argument. It wasn't a request for himself. It wasn't to score points with anyone. It was just the simplest, saddest thing in the world. All he wanted was to save his sister from the cold of that night. Leonardo felt a strange urge to kneel down. His knees started to tremble, unbidden, with memories of long ago, when he was a kid himself living in a shack, father gone, mother worn out. For the first time in years, someone was looking straight at him and not asking for something for themselves, but pleading for someone even smaller, someone not even awake to notice. The silence was enormous. You could hear a dog barking far off, and suddenly a car crawling down the wet street, just light and noise, nothing to change the scene. You could see Davi was shivering more out of worry than cold. He stroked his sister's arm gently, pressed his lips tight, stared at the ground, as if just by asking, he risked losing everything again. As if trusting a grown-up was asking too much from the universe. And you? Leonardo ventured, voice catching. Don't you want anything? Davi looked at him like someone who's heard it all before. He only shook his head slowly, tired, proud, old beyond his years. I can manage, he said, looking at nothing, but in a way that made Leonardo realize it wasn't really true. You could see the worn hole in his shoe, bones showing in his cheeks, a strand of hair sticky with sweat. Still, he wouldn't ask for a thing. Luisa sighed softly, moved her mouth as if dreaming of food, but never opened her eyes. The blanket rose and fell, far too small to keep out the cold of the street. Only her brother's warmth kept her there, quietly. Leonardo's stomach dropped. It was like some old weight, forgotten under all the expensive watches and meetings and luxury trips, dragged him down to the cold asphalt again. Why had he never noticed? How many times had he walked past kids like this, just quickening his step or crossing to the other side of the street? He pulled his hand from his pocket. The money felt useless. He wanted to give the boy his coat, but knew no coat could really fix that night. He just stood there, no idea what to do, but knowing he couldn't turn his back. He looked again at Davi and how he was small, lost, but trying hard to be strong. He tried to imagine what he'd do if he'd lost his mother, if there was no one to watch over him, no hand to reach for, just himself and a scrap of someone even smaller to protect from the world. It was easy to understand the fear and anger, to feel his own chest tighten, the way Davi curled his body around his sister. A horn echoed at the corner, but it felt like there was only space here for four: Leonardo, Davi, Luisa, and the dirty silence of the street. After a moment, Leonardo felt something break inside himself. It wasn't pity. It was almost shame, but ran deeper. The kind of pain that makes you want to stand up, open your home, turn on every light, even for people who never asked you for anything. He picked up his phone, stared at it, but had no idea who to call. No one ever taught him what to do when a kid just asked for some food for his sister. Suddenly, he saw it wasn't really about rescuing anyone. It was about being there. About cutting through your own numbness, silencing your fear, and listening to what someone else's silence is trying to say. He stayed there, shivering. But he wasn't leaving. Not anymore. Leonardo looked up at the sky one last time before opening the car door. The glass already spattered with those thick drops of rain that hit harder when everything outside is still. It seemed like the water dragging along the streets echoed in his very bones. Davi's thin hand, far too small, clutched the cart's handle, hesitating. He swallowed hard, fear on his face, the kind of fear that comes from being turned away so many times you can't believe in kindness, not even the simplest kind. Leonardo called to them again, his voice choked, but he tried to sound calm. "Come on, get in with me," he said, nodding toward the car. "Just to keep you warm, okay?" Davi looked first at the man's face, then at the car, a heartbeat. Then his eyes shot to Luisa, only wanting to make sure he could take her with him. Davi paused, waiting for some last threat from the stranger or some sudden, scary noise. But all he heard was the wind moaning, the plastic of the cart crackling, the heavy breathing of his sister, almost drowned out beneath the blanket. The boy picked up Luisa's frail body in his arms, clumsy, like he was carrying the most precious thing in the world, even with his thin arms and drenched clothes. They walked over slowly to the car. Leonardo opened the back door. The seat smelled strongly of new leather mixed with expensive cologne. Inside, the contrast was jarring. The streetlights painted reflections on the glass, as if this were another world. Davi kept Luisa hugged tight, sat down with her on his lap, almost curling up, eyes on his feet, trying to leave as little mess behind as possible. Leonardo noticed. The boy didn't rest his back against the seat, sitting crooked, probably afraid to get it dirty, to leave a mark, to damage anything. He caught every detail, the way Davi's fingers squeezed his sister's tiny hand, almost hurting his own knuckles. The gentle way he tucked the blanket around her, shielding her face from the cold that still seeped through the door. Luisa, even asleep, moved her lips. A slow tear crept down and shone in the faint light, as if her sleep wasn't peaceful, just a place to hide from all she felt. Leonardo would never forget that. He'd never seen anyone cry in their sleep before. For a moment, the three of them just sat there, each lost in silence. Only the far-off hum of engines, a neighbor's door slamming, and the noise of rain beating on his silver hood. Leonardo gripped the wheel but didn't start the car. He sat still, looking in the rearview mirror, feeling a tightness growing in his chest. He thought again of simply calling social services, that number he kept in his wallet, and moving on. But the pain in Davi's eyes changed everything. It wasn't the look of someone begging or someone hoping for a handout. It was pure exhaustion, resignation, the sense that asking for anything only meant losing what little you had. Leonardo remembered when he was a child. He'd been cold before, too, but it had been so long. He'd learned to bury those memories like patching a crack with good cement, hoping it would never show again. Here, with these two, it was like the crack was exposed, pulsing. He took a box of tissues from the glove compartment, offered it gently. Davi didn't take any, just stared back, wary. Leonardo thought of saying something else but decided against it. He left the box by their side, turned the heat up just a little, not too high, not to scare them, taking it slow. Gradually, a new smell filled the car, a blend of rain, damp earth, and that sweet yet sour smell of a child who's gone too long without a bath. But beneath it, there was also the scent of hope. Leonardo felt it moving inside him, shaking loose everything he'd left stagnant in his heart. He thought about his own kids. In Davi's every gesture, he saw a sense of responsibility that should be impossible for a child that age. Always alert, always ready to defend his sister no matter what. You could tell from the way he stayed silent, staring at his lap, glancing up sometimes at the rearview mirror to see if Leonardo was still there, or if any moment he might send them away. The guilt crept in, guilt for having walked past so many like this and never stopping, never really looking. It hurt. Physically, even. But there was a strange feeling, too, that maybe tonight, just once, someone could do something different. Wisa stirred, pressed her face into her brother's arm, murmured softly. Davi tucked the blanket around her again, whispering almost silently, "It'll be okay, I promise. I'm here." And even in sleep, she seemed to settle a little more. Leonardo suddenly wanted to cry, something rare for him. He pushed it down, breathed deep. He didn't want to scare them. He ran through his options: shelters, hospitals, hotels. He was afraid of making the wrong move, of doing everything wrong. But he knew, for sure, he couldn't leave those children there. Not in that rain. Not after seeing Davi's eyes. Not knowing what else to do, he just started the engine. The hum of an expensive car in a neighborhood this silent at this hour sounded out of place. Leonardo fastened his seatbelt, looked back at the kids, and said, "You'll come with me, just until we find somewhere safe for you to sleep. I promise." His voice was softer than he expected, full of emotion he couldn't even begin to name. The car glided slowly over the wet street. The windows fogged over, streetlights passing sluggishly by. Inside, time felt different. All their fates, suddenly tangled, headed in the same direction. The fear was still there, mixed with relief, with doubt, and with a trace of hope nobody dared show yet. Outside, only the pounding rain, as if the whole city was crying along with that tear on Lisa's cheek. The cold of early morning gave no respite. The inside of the car steamed up, the warm air clashing with the frozen street outside. Leonardo drove slowly, not really sure where to go. The silence weighed as heavy as the rain tapping the roof. In the back seat, Davi hugged the still sleeping Wisa, eyes always wary, never blinking for long. At every red light, Leonardo checked the rear view. Davi watched him, but said nothing. He just held his now-awake little sister, quiet in the dirty blanket. The smell of abandoned childhood and fear seemed to fill the space. Deep down, Leonardo just wanted to hand the kids over safely to someone. He figured a shelter or institution would know what to do. It seemed simple, but the city grew even more hostile at night. His first try was a neighborhood daycare, a tired building, pale facade dimly lit by the streetlight. Leonardo rang the bell several times. He waited for long minutes, but no one appeared. Just the far-off sound of barking dogs. Davi stayed sunk in his coat, face pressed to Wisa. Leonardo fiddled with his hands, restless. An alarm shrieked somewhere, loud and irrelevant. He got back in the car. He wanted to punch the steering wheel, but checked himself when he looked at the kids. It felt like carrying two lives, and he couldn't frighten them more. Davi's eyes grew wider, but he said nothing, just more silence. They tried a public shelter farther away. The rain pounded harder. The courtyard was lit up, but the gate was locked. An older woman appeared at the window, looked twice, and shook her head, even before Leonardo could speak. "Full up. Sorry, no room." Leonardo insisted. Told the story. Explained about the kids in the cold. The woman's expression didn't change. There are a lot of children like that. Not until morning, if there's a free spot. Her tone was as firm as a closed door. In the car again, the windows started to sweat. Leonardo felt a rage he couldn't explain. Not just at the system, but at himself, for not being able to do anything, for thinking money or good intentions were enough. Meanwhile, Davi, small and sturdy, didn't cry or beg, just stared straight ahead, like he wished he could disappear. Wisa slept with her eyes half open now, harsh, heavy breathing, the sound of someone carrying the world on her back, even though she was only 3. Leonardo tried calling another shelter, but no one answered. His own list of contacts felt useless against these invisible walls that excluded so many. He noticed Davi's hands, small, marked, dirty, and wondered when the boy last had a hot shower. With each of Leonardo's attempts, Davi grew quieter, more tense. At one point he rested his chin on the top of Luisa's head, almost an apology, almost as if saying goodbye. Leonardo saw it. It was as if the boy already knew. Any mistake, any slip, and someone would separate him from her. Trying to be kind, Leonardo asked softly, "Are you hungry? Do you want something?" Davi looked at him, a small startle, but didn't answer. Just hugged Luisa tighter, fist clenched nervously on his knees. They tried 2 more places. Always the same answer, always closed doors, always bureaucracy, forms, schedules, rules. Leonardo's eyes began to sting from anger, helplessness, maybe even shame for never having imagined this side of life. The night was fading into dawn, and exhaustion set in. Leonardo's head throbbed. He wanted to scream but stayed silent. In the cramped space, every noise was huge, Luisa's soft snoring, the car window humming, Davi's unshed tears caught in his throat. Leonardo met the boy's eyes one last time before driving a few more blocks. "I promise I won't split you up." His voice wavered, quiet, but honest. For the first time, Davi looked up, not as someone convinced, but as someone who desperately wants to believe. He still said nothing. Clarity came slow, bitter, like a kind of moral hangover. Leonardo thought of all his father's advice about staying uninvolved, how he'd spent a lifetime keeping distance from anything that smelled of poverty. Now poverty was a boy and his sister, 2 chili bundles in the backseat of his car. On the dashboard, almost 5 a.m. In Davi's battered bag, just some old papers and a limp, half-finished pack of crackers. Nothing else. Luisa started to cough, and suddenly Leonardo wanted to cry like a child, for all the lack of answers. Outside, the dawn held no promise. There was just more rain, trash, cars speeding by, and the smell of a weary night. Leonardo tapped the wheel, more certain than ever that if it depended on the system, these children would vanish like so many others. The silence between them became a pact. For now, it was Leonardo trying to save, and Davi trying not to be noticed, each fighting in his own way, not really knowing what to do. Even so, in that moment, in the timid warmth of the back seat, one thing was certain: nobody here was going to sleep. Rain from the night still slid down the car windows. Leonardo drove slowly, streetlights drifting past tired eyes, slicing through the fatigue etched on his face. The silence weighed heavier than the foreign engine, almost muffling even the chaos in his mind. Funny, every time he tried to convince himself he did all he could, that the responsibility wasn't his, Davi's face would surface. The boy's gaze clung to him. It didn't matter if 1,000 people said not to get involved, to leave it to the authorities, if his friends repeated, "You're looking for trouble," or if his family warned, "There are so many kids on the street. It's not your fault, Leo." He was here, in the middle of the night, heart pounding harder than any boardroom session ever had. He checked the rear view. Davi curled at the seat's edge, trying to cover his sleeping sister with a shirt too big for her. Luisa didn't move, just her chest rising and falling, exhausted but never finding real rest and sleep. The thought squeezed Leonardo's heart, to think what it must feel like to wake up in dread, afraid someone might take you from the only hands you know. He tried to imagine it, life in motion, never knowing where you'll sleep next, dozing in a shopping cart in a wet parking lot, hiding from noise, from people, from everything. The sky was growing lighter. That gray-blue, as if the day didn't really want to begin. The streets were almost empty, only a few cars heading home from whatever job, tired people, too, at least with somewhere to go. Leonardo wasn't even sure anymore if he was headed home or driving by instinct, just knowing he had to get as far as possible from the emptiness of that sidewalk where he had found Davi and Luisa. He turned on the hazard lights, pulled over in a quiet spot. Sat there for a while, just listening to the last drops of rain running down the silver roof. Ran his hand over his face, the rough stubble scraping his skin, and wondered how he ended up here. His phone buzzed again. Family group. A long audio from his sister telling him not to make trouble, that this kind of thing only brings headaches. A text from his business partner. "Don't forget the meeting today, Leo." The presenter from abroad arrives early. He ignored everything. There was no way to fake it now. He remembered his mother's face, that he never spoke about, not even to his siblings. His childhood had been harsh too, but there's a world of difference between being broke and having no roof, no one to hold your hand at night. He remembered nights without power, mother dividing food to make it last the week, but always someone sitting at the edge of the bed, even if just to tug the blanket up. Leonardo felt ashamed for all the times he'd ignored stories like Davi's. He used to think that slipping someone a bit of money now and then was enough. But sitting beside him now, hearing the boy's breathing, feeling the tension as he protected his sleeping sister, no amount of money ever taught that. In the back seat, Davi opened his eyes, disoriented, peeking from behind his threadbare jacket. There was no expectation of affection in his look, only vigilance, readiness to run. Leonardo saw that even with shelter, the boy couldn't relax. He watched in silence through the mirror. He wondered, will they ever trust me? And half afraid, if he himself was really up to the task. People said it was dangerous, that it could bring trouble, that someone could accuse him of something. What if something went wrong? How do you bring two children into your world when your world has always been built of closed gates, armored garages, and emotional barricades? He turns around, tries to smile, but it's a timid, awkward grin. It's okay. Are you cold? Davi just nods, then adjusts his arm and pulls Luisa close to his chest. Leonardo notices the boy is daydreaming. You can see it in his eyes. He must be imagining what it'd be like to have a real house, a real bed, a hot meal every day. At the same time, Leonardo senses that kind of fear that freezes your whole body. Fear of losing his sister, fear of trusting someone and being abandoned again. Leonardo's hand rests on top of the gear stick, and in his head the question pops up, what if I leave these kids here now? Just thinking about it, a void opens up inside him, a kind of echo suffocating his chest. He visualizes them curled up once more under that storefront awning, waiting for the next adult to walk by and pretend not to see them. I could never forgive myself, he thinks. It doesn't matter how much he earns, how nice his apartment is, how many partners' handshakes he gets. There's a kind of regret that never goes away, and deep down, he knows he'll carry it forever if he abandons Davi and Luisa. The sky gets lighter, birds start singing somewhere in the distance, even in the cold. It's almost cruel, a new day for everyone, while for them, nothing changes. Leonardo adjusts the mirror and looks back at the rear seat. He sees innocence crushed by responsibility, sees Davi's courage keeping Luisa safe, even while afraid. Leonardo remembers his own nights as a kid, wondering if he'd ever have a different life. I can give them that, he thinks, and feels that good kind of fear, a chilling mix of anxiety and hope. For the first time in a long while, Leo feels maybe being there for someone else, beyond just making money, makes sense. And even though he doesn't know what to do next, he knows one thing for sure, he won't turn back anymore. The clock in the living room was nearly 9 a.m. outside. The city hurried along beneath a gray sky, cars honking, people bustling under umbrellas. Inside Leonardo's apartment, time seemed different, almost paused. He paced back and forth, phone in hand, but didn't have the nerve to call anyone. He'd already looked at Davi's face 10 times, sitting on the couch with his sister, and it hurt more every time to see so much fear in such a little boy. Davi didn't even blink. He just hugged Luisa, whose heavy head dropped onto his lap, her feverish eyes half closed, her little body limp. Leonardo couldn't remember when they'd last eaten. He'd offered them bread and milk when they arrived, but Davi hardly touched it, offering everything slowly to his sister as if each piece were a rare gift. Nothing Leonardo said could break through that quiet, stubborn shell, but there was something there, a faint thread of hope, nearly invisible, growing inside those dark eyes. You could see it. Once things relaxed a little, the coffee ready, Luisa nestled in. Leonardo sat close to the children and took a deep breath. He needed to decide. He ran a hand through his hair, hearing his own breathing, heavy and nervous. After putting it off for ages, he finally called his lawyer, Simone. On the other end, silence. She listened to the rescue story, paused the way lawyers do, and then started firing off questions. Are you sure, Leo? You know the headache? The system doesn't trust rich folks getting involved like this. They'll be suspicious. There's lots of paperwork, so many rules, they might even ask, why are you doing this? Why help at all? He didn't really have an answer. He couldn't explain the tightness in his chest when he saw Davi trying to be an adult. All he could say was that he couldn't leave them on the street, that he just couldn't keep pretending not to care anymore. Simone sent a list of documents, asked for photos of the kids, the address of the public shelter, even character letters from friends proving he was a person of good standing. Leonardo felt embarrassed by that bit. It seemed ridiculous. But he did it. He printed the forms, hunted down his ID, proof of income. He couldn't stop trembling, and it wasn't the cold. It was fear. Fear he'd fail. Fear someone would say no. Fear the kids would be lost to some faceless system. The intercom buzzed in the middle of all the chaos. The doorman dropped off another letter in the lobby, but Leonardo didn't even look at it. He could only think about the courthouse. He looked down at the little kid's shoes, Davi in battered sneakers, Luisa in mismatched sandals. Each tiny detail made him want to cry. He took them both, Davi reluctant, Luisa sleepy, down to the car. The drive to the courthouse was tense and silent. Davi stared through the window, watching the city as if searching for a way out. Luisa slept, hair stuck to her damp forehead. In the nice-smelling car with its leather seats, the children seemed out of place, like two forgotten faces from an old movie. At the courthouse door, Leonardo felt the security guard's suspicious gaze. The man asked right away, heading to child services? Leonardo swallowed hard, said he just needed to talk, it was urgent. Took a number. Waited. The waiting room was freezing, white-walled, packed with serious faces, attorneys with neat black folders. Leonardo noticed every whisper, every sideways glance. It felt like everyone there had already formed an opinion just by looking at him, the well-dressed man with two grubby, clinging kids. An older woman walked by, looked Davi over from head to toe, then exchanged glances with the social worker. Leonardo squeezed Davi's hand tighter. After over an hour, they called his name with bored disinterest. He went in and told the story again, the shopping cart, the cold, the absent family. The social worker, a woman with her hair in a severe bun, asked, "Why would you do all this?" Leonardo fished for anything but the real answer, which was, "I don't know. I just have to." In a rough voice, he said he'd been poor, that you don't forget what it's like to be forgotten, that he couldn't let this story end like that. He was embarrassed for how his eyes shined. He didn't want to cry. Davi stood there, eyes low, his hand gripping Luisa's as she fiddled with his sleeve. When they asked if there were any relatives, Davi just shook his head. No one. Leonardo grew more anxious, cold sweat running down his back, as a suited man fired a storm of questions, trying to find a reason for everything to fall apart. They wanted to know, was he just trying to show off? Was it guilt? A rich man's charity? Doubts everywhere. They didn't seem to see Davi at all, only him, the millionaire. He thought about giving up several times that morning, especially when he saw the boy's exhaustion, the fragile flush in Luisa's cheeks. But he couldn't, so he waited for every stamp, every formality. No one smiled when they left. They handed him a wrinkled slip, saying he'd be called for another meeting, maybe in 2 days, if he could prove everything he'd said. Leonardo whispered his thanks, eyes misty. Back in the car, Davi caught his eye in the rearview mirror. It wasn't suspicion anymore, just a silent question, fear mixed with, maybe, some small hope for a happy ending. The sky stayed gray, traffic crawling. Luisa muttered sleepily in her brother's lap. Clutching the steering wheel, Leonardo was overwhelmed with the urge to hug them both, as if he could shield their entire past with his arms. He thought of so many other children who would never have anyone there for them. For a moment, he felt furious at the whole system, at every adult who turned away. But it passed. He just wanted to get home, make lunch, try to pretend they were just another ordinary family. The battle was only beginning, and he knew it. But looking at Davi now, sleeping with his head pressed against the window, finally breathing easier, Leonardo thought maybe, just maybe, it was worth the fight, no matter how hard it all got. Deep down, it was still night inside those children's eyes. But for the first time since the rain, there was a new kind of light there. Maybe, just maybe, hope. It was late, nearly 2 in the morning, when Leonardo woke up on the sofa, his back aching. The apartment was silent, only the distant patter of rain on the living room window. For some reason, he hadn't managed to sleep in his own bed. The fear of something happening to the children kept him close, even if he wouldn't admit it to anyone. The hallway light was still on, you know? That soft yellow glow that never quite reaches the corners. He got up slowly, his body heavy, and walked to the makeshift kid's room. The little room was piled with cardboard boxes he still hadn't gotten rid of. There, Davi slept curled up on the mattress, legs drawn in, his arms stretched out, practically glued to his little sister, like he was afraid a storm would carry her away if he let go. Luisa, tiny and frail, seemed lost to the world. She slept the deep sleep only a truly exhausted child knows. The blanket had slipped off, and she was shivering, even with the heater on. Leonardo crept in, barely making a sound, and gently pulled the blanket up around her. He watched the girl's face, delicate lashes, a small dirty hand clutching a ragged cloth doll, too old to give away. Then he felt something hard under the torn fabric. It was like a crumpled piece of paper, pushed up near her chest. He thought about leaving it there, but couldn't. Carefully, he pulled it free, trying not to wake anyone. It was a wrinkled sheet, marked by fingerprints and smudges. The paper was tearing at the corners. The pen had skipped in places. He didn't know why, but his heart raced. He unfolded the paper slowly, afraid it would tear more. At first, it didn't make sense. The handwriting trembled, some words faded, but it was clear enough. A long letter, written by hand. Leonardo read the first line and froze. It was addressed to anyone who found Luisa and Davi. The mother talked about her 2 kids. She spoke of the terror of dying and leaving her little ones alone, the agony of not being able to find work, the days when all she could give them was a single stale piece of bread to share. The letter explained that Luisa had almost not survived birth, got sick in her first few weeks. Some rare infection, the kind of illness you only see in news stories, targeting the most fragile. Leonardo's mouth went dry at this part. The mother wrote about spending days hiding in the hospital lobby, sleeping upright, praying nonstop, hoping for a miracle. And then came the part that changed everything. The mother said that on a cold morning 3 years before, a hospital worker woke her up and said someone had donated money for her baby's treatment. A man who wanted no name, wanted nothing, just to help. That donation saved Luisa's life. Leonardo had to sit down at the foot of the mattress. The paper shook in his hand, a knot tightening in his stomach, hard to explain. He remembered that time exactly. He remembered a call from his secretary about some anonymous fundraising. The hospital was desperate for too many sick kids and nobody willing to take responsibility. He donated, hoping at least one mother could sleep in peace that night. He never thought it'd have a face, a name. That the little girl he was tucking in right now was the very one he'd helped save, without ever knowing it. The letter went on. The mother said she had no idea how long she'd last, if she'd be strong enough to raise her children. She wrote how, whoever had helped, she'd be forever grateful, and asked, if anyone ever found her kids, to treat them with kindness, not pity. They're strong, they just need someone who can see them. The handwriting wavered even more here. You could almost feel how her hand must have ached. At the end, she left a note for Luisa. If you grow up and someone gives you a chance, promise you'll never let anyone separate you from Davi. Your brother is brave. He's your shield. The tears came suddenly, hot. Leonardo wiped his face so he wouldn't drip on the child, but it was impossible to hold back. He sat there with the letter open, reading the lines again and again. He looked over at Davi for a moment, the way the boy slept, arms wrapped around his sister, like there was nowhere safe in the world but right there. And he thought about everything he'd tried to avoid all his life, feelings, memories of his own poor childhood, that overwhelming shame he carried of caring too much for the suffering of people he didn't even know. It was all right there again, closing the circle in ways he couldn't even describe. Somehow, for some strange reason, he was meant to be there. This wasn't an accident. A distant siren cut through the silence, bringing him back to the tiny room, to the mattress on the floor, to the weight of responsibility growing with each unanswered night. But holding that letter, Leonardo felt a different kind of warmth. Not just fear, not just pity. It felt like purpose, a sense of mission. As if, in that simple apartment with those 2 siblings curled up together, he had finally found the thing he'd been looking for all his life without knowing what it was. He looked at Luisa, asleep with her mouth open, doll flopped at her side. He looked at Davi, skinny, marked by more suffering than most grown-ups could take. He took a deep breath, folded the letter up with infinite care, and tucked it back close to the little girl's chest, just as he'd found it. And he stayed there for a while, listening to their soft breathing, the delicate drops of rain on the glass. For the first time in a long time, Leonardo felt no urge to run from it. He felt at home. Leonardo sat on the couch, a little hunched over, letter crumpled in his hands. It was the middle of the night, only the sound of rain at the window breaking the silence. Sleep wouldn't come, his mind wouldn't shut off. The handwriting on the page was uneven, the writing of someone sick, exhausted, but pouring their heart out anyway. He read it all again, even though he already knew every word. His hand shook, his eyes burned, but he kept going. Every line tugged old memories loose. Davi and Luisa's mother spoke of sleepless nights, long hours waiting for answers, and how, when nobody else came, a medicine arrived, a shred of hope. She wrote, "I'll never forget the man who saved my daughter, even if I don't know who he is. If he ever reads this, thank you. You gave me more time with my children." Leonardo felt a stab deep in his chest. It wasn't just gratitude on the page, it was life. It was those 2 sleeping upstairs in his guest room, alive because he'd once signed a check, thinking it was a small thing, that it would vanish in the world, not knowing it had become part of their destiny, whether he wanted it or not. Leonardo buried his face in his hand, trying to hold back the tears, but he couldn't. He sobbed quietly, afraid the kids would hear. He never imagined that old donation coming back to him like this, like a knot tying itself in places he never knew. He thought of all the times he'd been scared to get too involved, all the times people tried to talk him out of this story. It wasn't his problem. There were better people for that. Now it all seemed foolish. He'd been part of their family long before he met Davi and Luisa on the sidewalk. It was as though life had brought him right where he needed to be. He looked again at the letter. Remembered Davi's wary gaze, always suspicious but never letting his guard down over his sister. Remembered Luisa clutching a blanket, softly asking for comfort, trying not to be a bother. Remembered the beginning, his own fear of getting close, shame at not knowing what to say. Now it all fit. He was the missing link in their story, the piece they needed to begin again. The rain thudded harder, drumming on the roof and streaming down the glass. The room filled with the scent of damp paper, mixed with Luisa's old blanket. Leonardo clung to the letter, feeling new heat in his chest, warm tears streaming down his face. He knew this wasn't only guilt or charity anymore. It was love, it was connection, it was family. He knew then he didn't want to lose those two. He couldn't. He made a promise, softly, just to himself and God, gazing up at the dark ceiling. I'll never abandon these children. He thought of everything left to sort out, the paperwork, fear of court, outsiders' opinions, even the awkward glances from family and friends. None of it mattered. That letter was proof he had meaning, a purpose. It wasn't just about a roof or a meal. It was about giving a life, a chance, giving back to the universe what he'd received, even if he never asked for it. He lay on his side, eyes open, listening to the kids breathing in the next room. Occasionally, he'd hear a sigh, a faint whimper in their sleep, that simple piece of those who've never had much but each other's affection. He almost went in to check if they were covered, but stayed put, just listening. For the first time, he felt a new peace, a mix of anxiety and courage. Even the silence felt different that night. He thought of their mother, tried to imagine her face between the lines, her smile, the way she must have spoken to the children. He stayed there, thankful, hoping maybe she could see all of this from wherever she was. Later, of course, sleep never came. Leonardo got up quietly, shuffled to the window. Outside, the city looked washed clean. Cars moved slowly, hardly any buses, everything muted by the rain. A stray cat darted down the sidewalk, a plastic bag tumbling in the wind. He remembered the first time he saw the two of them in the street. That freezing night, the fear in Davi's eyes, Luisa's little body curled in a shopping cart. What hurt most was knowing there are so many invisible people in the world, and he'd almost let these two slip by. Almost. He went back to the living room, sat again, letter pressed to his chest. He couldn't ignore how much this mattered. Those two were his now, part of his story. And he wasn't running anymore. He didn't even think about money, about bills, about anything. He thought about the way Davi watched his sister whenever she moved in her sleep. About the way Luisa smiled at him, a little shy but full of trust. And there, alone in the dark, he made another promise. Not in fancy words, no big speech. Just the simple thought of someone who understood the true value of life. He wasn't just the rich businessman anymore. He was someone returned to his own past, rescuing and being rescued. And now, he could hardly wait to see their future together. The social worker smiled at Leonardo the way you give someone a precious key. The paper trembled in his hand, ink still fresh, but it was the look from the two officials, and that final stamp, that made it truly real. He was now responsible for Davi and Luisa. Officially the father of two little ones who, not long ago, had nowhere to sleep. For a few seconds, he just stood there, the paper at his chest, a strange warmth growing under his suit. In the far corner, Davi shrank back, hiding half his face behind the sleeve of a sweatshirt already more his than the store's, while Luisa colored a piece of paper, dead serious, as if it were the hardest job in the world. As Leonardo crouched down to their level, he was scared to startle them. Davi didn't offer his cheek for a kiss or hold out his hand, but he didn't move away either. Just looked up, deep, searching. The eyes of a child who's already seen too much. Luisa reached out with both arms without a second thought. In his lap, she buried her face in his neck with a tired sigh, as if she'd finally found a nest after days flying with no place to land. That first car ride home was quiet. The world outside stayed gray and wet, tires slicing puddles, rain streaming down the glass, but inside, it was as if time stopped every time Leonardo glanced at the back seat. Luisa dozed deep in her car seat, and Davi looked out at the sky, practicing the sound of his own name when Leonardo called. "You okay back there, Davi?" He never replied, just a tiny nod. At the door to the apartment, Leonardo paused, keys still in his fist. The big cold hallway, the same old silence. Now they felt even emptier with the little one's footsteps. When he opened the door, he looked back again, almost asking, "Are you sure you can come in?" But Luisa crossed the soft carpets without hesitation, as if the place had always been meant for her. Davi, on the other hand, stepped inside so carefully, barely touching down with his toes, eyes darting up and around as if something might jump out any second. While Leonardo tried to hide his own nerves, scratching at a beard grown wild from sleepless nights, Luisa's little voice broke the silence. "Uncle Leo, where's Mommy?" There was no dodging that question. Leonardo swallowed hard, knelt beside her in the lighted hallway, and could only whisper, "Mommy's a twinkling star now, Lazinha. But I'm here." She looked back at him, solemn, those big eyes pulling strength from somewhere deep, and just hugged his neck tight. No lessons needed. Right then, for the first time, Leonardo felt his heart overflowing gratitude, fear, responsibility, and that faint line of hope he'd stopped wishing for. In the kitchen, he tried to heat up something to eat. He was used to the smell of a lonely house, a fridge stocked with expensive things that never touched the heart. That night, the smell of rice and hot dogs filled the air, nothing like his rushed evening meals. Luisa ate perched on the counter, swinging her little legs, eyes wide at every mouthful. Davi took his plate carefully, watched his sister, waited until she finished before taking his first bite. Even there, hunger mixed with care, as if sharing the last spoonful was second nature. Leonardo noticed. He tucked away the memory of Davi's protectiveness, the kind of manners only life on the street teaches a boy who'd grown up too soon. After dinner, Luisa discovered the shaggy living room rug and the giant pillows. She laughed, and her laughter made even the ceiling seem to smile. She scattered toys Leonardo barely remembered buying, colorful balls rolling everywhere, as if the house finally had a reason to exist. Davi hung at the edge of the couch, watching everything, like every minute might bring danger. He only moved to retrieve a pacifier from Luisa's hand. When Leonardo suggested they go upstairs for a bath, that's when Davi truly hesitated. He wouldn't let go of the bag of clothes he'd brought, hugging it like armor. Leonardo saw his eyes fill with tears, pretending it was nothing, just tiredness. In the end, they went into the room together, and Leonardo, awkwardly, showed how a hot shower could wash away the street's chill. He washed Luisa's little feet, then gave Davi space. He stood in the hall, listening to the water running, thinking back to his own tough childhood, when play was just a distant dream and fear lived beneath his bed. In the room he'd thrown together at the last minute, sheets picked from the city's priciest store but still smelling too new and strange, Leonardo fluffed the kids' pillows. Luisa face-planted, pulling her tattered blanket close, and tugged Davi by the hand. He hesitated, nearly refused to come in, only lay down after his little sister, fearless for all her size, called, "Stay with me, Davi." The 8-year-old climbed up slowly, lay on his side, protecting her with his small frame. Leonardo sat on the floor beside them for a few minutes, just watching. He didn't know how to pray, but closed his eyes and, in some way, asked for protection for two little angels who weren't invisible to him anymore. With the bedside lamp casting soft shadows, he saw Luisa's little hand reach for his in the darkness, squeezing gently. And Davi, almost asleep, whispered, "Will you be here tomorrow too?" Leonardo held back the tears in his throat, that old ache of loneliness mixed with the certainty that yes, now he had a home, he had a family. "I'm not going anywhere." "Not ever again," he said, voice breaking into a whisper. When it finally went quiet, Leonardo sat alone in the living room, looking at the toys scattered everywhere, a tiny pajama drying over a chair, the scent of home-cooked food still hanging in the air. Little by little, it was as if the house stopped being just walls and became a true refuge. Deep down, he knew the fear would take time to fade. For Davi, for Luisa, even for him. But that night, amid unexpected laughter, little feet pattering down the hallway, and tight hugs, the emptiness gave way to life starting over. The sky was still gray when Leonardo took Davi and Luisa out for the first time, bright and early, holding two tiny hands. Their uniforms looked almost too new for their small bodies, but Davi adjusted his collar like a grown-up, wearing a serious expression. Luisa only cared about the shiny bracelet Leonardo had given her so she wouldn't get lost. Every time her jacket sleeve slipped down, she pulled it up just to admire it again. Traffic rushed past in front of the school. People with briefcases and coffee in hand, horns blaring, a man selling cheese bread. But on the other side of the gate, the world felt different. Children spoke loudly. A ball bounced down the corridor. The smell of snacks mixed with the scent of wet, rain-soaked fur. Davi gripped his sister's hand tighter, almost squeezing. His eyes were restless and anxious, scanning for hidden dangers in every corner. Only those who have lived with fear know how to keep watch like that. He didn't blink, nor did he let go of his backpack. It was blue, heavier with anxiety than with books, because he'd checked his notebooks 3 times before leaving the house. Lisa, meanwhile, had her hair tied up all crooked, but thought she looked beautiful. In the hallway, she stumbled on her new sandals, nearly fell, but grabbed her brother's arm and smiled at him, unafraid. Whenever a stranger looked her way, she squinted, a little shy, then tried hiding behind Davi. Leonardo stood by the gate, clutching his visitor's badge, just watching. The doorman looked at him as if recognizing someone important, but Leonardo didn't feel important at all, not this time. His palms were sweaty, his face hot. It was a cold unlike the wind outside. It was fear of making mistakes, of not being enough. The teacher approached, a petite woman, hair pulled back, warm face. She knelt down to their level and spoke softly. Davi managed a barely audible good morning. He tried to hide a scar on his arm, tugging his sleeve up as far as it would go. Luisa went quiet, staring at her hands, the floor, her hands, the floor. Suddenly, kids started pushing past in the corridor, racing toward their classrooms. Davi froze. Leonardo spotted it from a distance, the pinched lips, clenched jaw, his chest rising like he wanted to cry but couldn't. For a moment, it looked like the boy might run. But Luisa held onto his finger with both hands, just like she would on the shopping cart, and looked up at him. "Are we going together?" Luisa whispered, her eyes shining with nothing but hope. The teacher called their names. Davi swallowed hard. He glanced sideways and saw Leonardo on the other side of the glass, waving, forcing a half-smile full of bravery he didn't feel. After all he'd survived, this was what scared Davi most. A school hallway packed with yelling children, not knowing if this place was really safe. They went in together, slow and uncertain. They passed murals with lopsided drawings, glittery stars hung from strings, a row of backpacks. Leonardo felt a lump rise in his throat. He thought about the days he'd only seen hallways like this through the window back when poor kids didn't have space here. So many years later, it was still hard to believe this was really happening. He checked his watch, leaning against the wall, detached from the world of the other parents. The voices inside ebbed and flowed, like waves. Sometimes he'd meet the suspicious gaze of a well-dressed mother. Someone whispered in the hall, pointing out the imported car outside. Leonardo ignored it, because he could only think of 2 things. Will they like it here? Will they get hurt again? Outside, the wind brought the scent of last night's rain, that cold memory of when everything was just loneliness and abandonment. He remembered the first time he saw Davi, the bravery in those small eyes even with a dirty face. He thought of Lisa shivering under a torn blanket, and of himself, too afraid to approach but unable to turn away. And now, here they were, in clean uniforms, hearing the teacher's call, ready to write stories they'd never been allowed before. Minutes dragged by like an eternity. Nearly an hour where Leonardo imagined 1,000 things. Davi crying in secret in the bathroom, Luisa alone in the courtyard, someone teasing them. But then, through the classroom window, Leonardo saw. Davi sat beside Luisa, right up front. The teacher showed a drawing on the board. Other kids talked loudly, giggled, some scribbled on loose sheets. Luisa chewed her pencil, still lost, but already offering her pencil case to the girl next to her. And then, without warning, Davi looked toward the door. He searched, found Leonardo's gaze outside. At first, his face stayed serious. Then, suddenly, his chin began to tremble. Just for a moment, a fleeting, fragile instant, Davi broke into a small, shy smile. That mouth that only knew how to shut tight. That face that only knew how to be hard. Suddenly, smiling. Leonardo bowed his head, his chest bursting with pride, relief, gratitude. He took a deep breath, trying not to let the tears slip out right there, in front of everyone. That was enough. Knowing that every sleepless night, every ounce of doubt, every fear of not being good enough, had been worth it. Inside, Davi was still looking out for his sister. But for the first time since their mother died, the first time since those cold sidewalks, he was simply a kid at school. Just a child letting his guard down, daring to dream. Leonardo stayed for a few more minutes. Watching. Waiting. Sensing that in that school, among the noise, pencils, and lunchboxes, he'd planted hope. And he swore to himself, never again would he let those 2 lose what had taken so much to win. The bell rang. Kids came running, laughing, stumbling, a blessed mess. Davi came to the door with his sister, hand in hand once more. But now, if you paid attention, there was something different shining in his eyes. No longer fear. It was life taking root again. Funny, isn't it? How long it takes us to realize that things really can change. In the beginning, Davi only glanced sideways, always on alert, even inside that big house, full of food, full of light. He kept constant watch over his sister, as if someone might come any minute to take her away again. And Leonardo saw it. It hurt to see. In the backyard, the trees swayed gently in the wind. The sky, clear of rain for the first time in weeks, let a tentative sun peek through the kitchen window as Luisa shuffled barefoot through the grass, all unsteady, tripping and giggling softly. The sound of her laughter was one of those small joys you want to close your eyes just to keep forever. Leonardo, on the porch, held a mug he didn't even remember pouring, just watching. He felt that odd satisfaction, and at the same time, a jittery feeling like someone bracing for disaster, just like Davi out there. It was always like that with Davi. He'd sit in a corner, clutching a broken toy truck they'd brought from the orphanage, just a toy now. Nearby, Luisa stacked rocks. For the first few days, she'd tug his sleeve to ask him to play, but he'd turn away, searching for threats in the empty space, as if he just couldn't let go of being her protector. Until one afternoon, things changed. Leonardo was lost in work calls and annoying notes when he heard a strange noise from the yard. He went outside, and it wasn't anything bad. It was just Luisa laughing out loud, fearless. And Davi, behind the tree, trying to hide a smile. A rock tumbled off the top of her pile and, without thinking, he spun around and yelled, "Careful." But this time, he laughed too. Leonardo froze inside. He'd never heard that sound from the boy before. He just stood there, feeling a pressure in his chest. The next day, Davi dared a little more. He accepted the soccer ball Leonardo had kept for years, one of those that were down all alone in the garage. At first, he kicked it shyly, playing just in Luisa's orbit, testing new ground. Luisa, of course, wanted in. She laughed and ran, and sure enough, tripped again, tumbling into her brother's lap. He caught her out of reflex, then let out a short, awkward laugh. The gardener, watching from afar, muttered to Leonardo, "That boy's learning how to be a kid." Huh? Leonardo just nodded. His voice wouldn't come. Time changed Davi little by little. The shadows under his eyes faded. His stern face gave way to a slow-blooming smile. He started asking for chocolate milk at breakfast. He'd clap when Luisa learned a new word. He even teased her a bit, in that rough way only brothers can. At night, he didn't startle so much at the sound of the gate. Leonardo found himself changing, too. Before, he'd only step inside after splashing his face with mineral water, as if everything had to be spotless and in its place. Now, he didn't mind toys in the living room, or the trail of dirt from Davi's boots. The silence he once found comforting now seemed empty. He craved the sound of little footsteps, wanted to see Luisa bolt from the bath and leap onto the bed. And it was one of those late afternoons, with the sky turning pink and orange, that everything shifted. Davi was out on the porch, leaning against the wall, watching the street. He still had that old habit. Leonardo came quietly and sat down beside him. They sat in silence for a while, not quite knowing how to start a conversation. Suddenly, Luisa appeared, face smudged with dirt and eyes sparkling. She stretched out her small hands and called, "Come play, Davi." He hesitated, glancing at the gate, then looked at Leonardo. And for the first time, he didn't see danger. Just a man who brought security, not fear. Davi let go of the gate, broke into a smile, and ran to his sister, laughing, still a little awkward. Leonardo felt an overwhelming urge to cry, but held back. He stood, watching, hands trembling, marveling at how someone so small could carry an entire world on their shoulders and still learn to set it down to play. The days rushed by. Davi began to invite his adoptive father to kick the ball around, to work on puzzles. He wanted to show off things he learned at school. Luisa stopped tripping so much, learned how to really run, arms wide, feet steady on the ground. Fear, slowly but surely, was changing color from shadow to sunshine, from silence to laughter. One night, the three of them sprawled on the couch. Luisa slept askew, her head on Davi's lap. He stroked her hair softly, and for a second, let go. He glanced at Leonardo. There was pride and gratitude in his eyes, but above all, peace. Leonardo smiled back in silence, thinking of all the things he'd spent too long trying to buy in life, only to realize the most precious thing was this calm moment, the simple sound of a child's laughter. Now, Davi was simply a child again. And Leonardo, sitting there, felt as if he were learning, for the first time, how to be a real father. The movie's halfway through already, but no one's really paying attention. The room is dark, just the TV casting bluish light over their faces. The couch seems too small for 3 people, but they made it work. Leonardo at one end, almost lying down, one arm wrapped around Davi, the other serving as a pillow for Luisa, stretched out in his lap, sleeping. Davi leans against Leonardo's chest, holding the big man's hand between his own small, thin ones, no longer shaking with cold. The old blanket is still with them, now clean and smelling fresh, covering them all together in the living room. There's popcorn on the table, already a little cold, but nobody cares. Luisa's breathing is soft and steady, but every now and then she moves her mouth, like she's dreaming of something good. Sometimes she stirs, arranges her head on Leo's arm, and sighs. Leonardo never takes his eyes off her. He touches her as if she might break, smoothing her hair, running his thumb over her brow. Davi notices and looks up at him with the old suspicious glance, but now there's something new, a subtle shine, a yearning to truly trust. Davi holds Leonardo's hand tighter. Outside, the rain has started again, drops drumming softly against the window. Now and then a car creeps along the street, sending a splash up from the curb. Out there, the world seems cold. In here, it doesn't. In here, at least for tonight, this is shelter. The movie cracks a joke, but only Leonardo laughs, a low, hoarse chuckle, as if he doesn't know whether he should laugh out loud or cry. He looks at Davi, feeling pride and sorrow at once. How had such a small boy managed to withstand so much? Leonardo ruffles Davi's hair, making him blush, almost smiling in spite of himself. He falls silent, turning to rest his head on Leo's chest. They stay like that for a long time, in that easy silence of people who no longer need words to know what they feel. Leonardo remembers the nights, just weeks ago, when he almost walked right past that shadow curled up beside the empty shopping cart. He remembers the coldness of the street, the fear, that ragged blanket, and his own heart feels heavy and light at the same time. He thinks of Davi's mother, of the letter found next to Luisa, shaky handwriting thanking someone for medicine. How everything fell into place in ways he could never have imagined. Davi whispers softly, barely moving his lips. "Thank you," and squeezes Leonardo's hand, as if afraid the moment might slip away. Leonardo feels a lump in his throat. He gazes at the boy, searching for something to say, but finds no words that fit. He simply strokes Davi's hand with care, the way his own father used to do, so many years ago, when everything was hard. He thinks, so much money, so much luxury, all that rushing, none of it compares to this embrace. Nothing, not the fanciest car, not the grandest house, can offer the warmth of a washed blanket, a child sleeping without fear, gratitude that needs no words. Luisa gives a deep sigh, smiling in her sleep. She seems to be dreaming of something wonderful, letting out a happy little sound, almost a laugh. Leonardo runs a finger over her face, feeling the warmth of her small, safe body. Davi glances at his sister, sees she's all right, and closes his own eyes for a moment, breathing deep. There, together, nobody is thinking of tomorrow, nor the past. Silence is simple comfort now. It's no longer the hush of hunger, fear, or abandonment. It's the silence of a home that's full of family. Leonardo's chest tightens, but in a good way, as if he's found something forgotten within himself. He thinks of the criticism he's heard, of the judgmental stares, and realizes none of that matters. Here, on this cramped couch, holding both children close, he finally found what he'd been seeking all along, meaning. The room starts to cool as the rain intensifies outside, falling hard. Leonardo pulls the blanket up, tucking everyone in better, shifting on the couch that's already a bit uncomfortable. But he never wants to get up again, never wants to let them go. The movie ends, credits roll, but nobody moves. Leonardo looks at the 2 children, feels tears threaten, and lets them fall. A single tear slips down. He wipes it away quickly, but the smile remains. He keeps thinking that, tonight, they became a real family. Not the kind that poses for pretty pictures and matching outfits, but a family of wounded souls, drawn together by choice, made strong because they found each other amidst the world's neglect. Davi keeps holding Leonardo's hand as he falls asleep, as if afraid it could all disappear by morning. Leonardo leans his head back against the couch, staring up, a strange sense of relief inside him. For the first time in years, he knows it worked out. He feels justice, hope, renewal, right at home, at last. The rain finally subsides, and quiet fills the space. All that's left is the gentle sound of children breathing, the warmth of an embrace, and Leonardo's heart beating slow, knowing that nothing will be the same ever again. There, on that awkward, crowded couch, they found a new life together.